Tom was an ordinary engineer who worked in a small space station orbiting Earth. He fixed machines, repaired engines, and rarely left his workplace. His life was simple and quiet. One morning, while checking a cargo list, a message arrived on his communication screen. The message was from an unknown source, written in a formal tone. It said that the king of Zorath Prime wished to meet him. At first, Tom thought it was a mistake. He was just an engineer, not an important diplomat. But the message carried an official seal recognized by the United Earth Council. It was real. Within hours, an ambassador from Zorath Prime arrived at the station in a silver transport ship. The ambassador was tall and wore a flowing robe with patterns that shimmered under the station lights. His voice was deep and calm. He told Tom that the king had heard about Tom's bravery in a past rescue mission where he had saved the crew of a damaged cargo vessel in deep space. The king respected courage and wanted to honor him as a special guest. Tom was surprised and nervous. He had never been to an alien world before. Still, he felt curious. This was a chance to see a place few humans had ever visited. After a short talk with his commander, Tom agreed to go. The ambassador smiled and guided him into the silver transport ship. The doors closed with a soft hiss, and they left the station. Behind the journey to Zorath Prime took several hours. Tom sat near a large window and watched the stars pass by. The ambassador explained some customs of Zorath Prime. The people valued honor, hospitality, and loyalty above all else. Guests were treated with great respect, and important visitors were often celebrated with feasts and ceremonies. Tom listened carefully, wondering what the king expected from him. Soon the ship approached a massive planet surrounded by rings that sparkled like jewels. The surface was covered in green plains, crystal-like mountains, and glowing rivers. The cities floated in the air, supported by huge anti-gravity platforms. Each city shone with lights and towers made from crystal and metal, shaped like tall spires that curved toward the sky. Tom had never seen anything so beautiful. They landed on a wide platform outside the royal palace. The air was fresh and carried a faint, sweet scent from flowering trees. The palace itself was a wonder. Its walls were made of shining silver stone, and the roof curved like the wings of a giant bird. Flags of deep blue and gold waved in the wind. A group of palace guards stood at the entrance, their armor polished and decorated with glowing symbols. The ambassador led Tom into a grand hall. The floor was smooth like glass, and tall windows allowed sunlight to stream inside. At the far end of the hall sat the king of Zorath Prime. He was a tall figure with broad shoulders and an air of calm authority. His robe was deep blue with golden patterns, and a crown of silver rested on his head. His eyes were sharp yet kind. The king rose to greet Tom. His voice was warm as he welcomed him to Zorath Prime. He spoke of Tom's courage and said that true heroes were rare in any world. Tom bowed slightly, unsure if he was following the correct custom. The king only smiled and motioned for him to rise. The atmosphere was friendly, but also filled with a sense of importance. After the welcome, servants brought a grand feast. The hall filled with music played on stringed instruments unlike any Tom had seen. Platters carried fruits that glowed faintly, breads with rich spices, and roasted meats from creatures raised on the royal lands. Tom was given a seat near the king, a place of honor few guests received. As the feast went on, the king spoke to Tom about Earth, asking questions about its people and culture. It was during this time that Tom noticed someone watching him from across the table. She was young, graceful, and wore a flowing dress the color of the evening sky. Her hair was long and dark, and her eyes carried a spark of curiosity. She was the princess, the king's daughter, and her name was Lyra. She listened closely whenever Tom spoke, and once or twice their eyes met. Tom looked away quickly, unsure if he should be speaking to her directly. When the feast ended, The king announced that Tom would be staying as his honored guest for as long as he wished. A private set of chambers had been prepared for him in the east wing of the palace. Servants escorted him there, carrying his small bag of belongings. The chambers were large and comfortable, with a bed covered in soft silks, a balcony overlooking the glowing rivers, and shelves lined with strange books. That night, Tom stood on the balcony, looking at the alien city under the stars. He could hear faint music from somewhere in the palace. He thought about his day and how quickly his life had changed. This morning, he had been repairing engines in a dusty space station. Now he was on a strange and beautiful world, treated as a hero by an alien king. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he felt that something important was beginning. The next morning, Tom woke to the sound of soft chimes. A servant entered his chambers and bowed politely. The servant said breakfast was ready, and the king wished for him to join the royal family in the garden. Tom dressed in clean clothes provided by the palace and followed the servant through long hallways. The walls were decorated with tapestries showing great battles, scenes of harvest, and the building of the floating cities. The royal garden was unlike anything Tom had seen. Tall trees with silver leaves shimmered under the morning light. Streams of crystal-clear water ran between flower beds, and small winged creatures hovered over the blossoms. The king sat at a stone table under a vine-covered archway. Beside him was Princess Lyra. She greeted Tom with a gentle smile, her eyes warm with curiosity. They shared a meal of fresh fruit, spiced bread, and a warm drink that tasted faintly of honey. The king asked about Tom's journey from Earth and what he thought of Zorath Prime so far. Tom spoke honestly, praising the beauty of the planet and the kindness he had received. Lyra listened closely, sometimes asking questions about human customs. She wanted to know what life was like on a space station and how humans traveled between stars. After breakfast, Lyra offered to show Tom the city. The king agreed, saying his daughter would make the best guide. 2 palace guards accompanied them for protection. They walked through the wide streets of the floating city. Buildings of crystal and stone reflected the light in soft colors. Airships shaped like sleek birds glided above, moving between the towers. The people of Zorath Prime were tall and graceful, wearing robes of bright colors. They greeted Lyra with deep bows and looked at Tom with respectful curiosity. Lyra took Tom to the Sky Market, a place where merchants sold goods from many worlds. There were stalls filled with glowing fabrics, carved gemstones, and strange musical instruments. Tom stopped at a booth where a craftsman was shaping a piece of crystal into a delicate flower, using nothing but his hands and a small tool. The craftsman gifted the flower to Tom as a token of welcome. Lyra explained that offering gifts to guests was a sign of respect in their culture. From the market, they visited the Hall of Knowledge, a massive library built inside a tower of blue stone. The walls inside were lined with scrolls, books, and crystal data orbs. Lyra showed him the history section, where records of ancient Zorath battles and treaties were kept. She pointed to an old painting of her ancestors standing beside humans from a past age. Tom was surprised to see that contact between their species had existed long ago. Though most humans no longer remembered it in the afternoon, Lyra guided Tom to the edge of the city where a viewing platform overlooked the glowing rivers far below. Air currents rose from the surface, carrying the scent of flowers and fresh rain. They stood quietly for a while, watching the soft waves. Lyra told Tom about her childhood, how she learned to fly small airships, and how she trained in diplomacy to help her father rule. Tom spoke about his work as an engineer, how he loved fixing things, and how he found peace in solving problems. Their conversation was easy and comfortable. Though they came from different worlds, they shared a respect for honesty and hard work. Lyra seemed fascinated by the idea of human ingenuity, while Tom admired her knowledge of her people's traditions. He noticed that she carried herself with calm dignity, but also had a spark of humor when she teased him gently about Earth's clumsy machines compared to Zorath technology. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the towers, they returned to the palace. The king was waiting in the main hall. He asked his daughter how the tour had gone, and she replied with a smile that Tom had shown great interest in their ways. The king nodded with approval. He then spoke privately to his advisors, though Tom could not hear the words. From their serious expressions, he guessed they were discussing important matters. That evening, a smaller dinner was held in a round chamber lit by hanging lanterns. Only the king, the princess, and a few close advisors were present. The meal was calm and filled with polite conversation. Lyra asked Tom to tell one of his favorite stories from Earth. He told them about the time he repaired a damaged cargo shuttle during a meteor storm, saving the crew from drifting into the void. The king listened with interest, and his advisors exchanged thoughtful glances. After dinner, the king invited Tom to walk with him in the moonlit garden. The silver leaves shimmered in the night, and the stars above were brighter than Tom had ever seen. The king spoke in a low voice. He said that Zorath Prime faced challenges from a rival empire, and that alliances were important for peace. He did not explain further, but hinted that Tom's presence might play a greater role than simple hospitality. Tom felt a mixture of pride and unease. He respected the king and his people, but he did not yet understand what was expected of him. Still, he knew this visit was no ordinary meeting between worlds. Something important was forming, and he was now part of it. When Tom returned to his chambers, he thought about the day. He had learned much about Zorath culture, shared stories with the princess, and gained the trust of the king. Yet he could sense that these friendly exchanges were leading toward something larger. As he looked out over the glowing rivers, he wondered what part he was meant to play in the future of Zorath Prime. The following morning, Tom was invited to the royal council chamber. The chamber was a wide circular room with tall crystal pillars and a great round table in the center. Around the table sat the king, his most trusted advisors, and the royal commander of the guard. The air inside felt heavy with importance. Tom was given a seat beside the king, a sign of trust that surprised him. The king began by speaking in a calm but serious tone. He explained that Zorath Prime was facing growing danger from the empire of Dravok. The Dravok were powerful and proud. They had claimed that Zorath Prime no longer held the strength to protect its people, and that the royal family lacked true allies. The king said the Dravok had sent warnings that if Zorath Prime did not agree to their demands, conflict would follow. Tom listened carefully. He had heard of the Dravok Empire in passing, but knew little about them. The royal commander explained that the Dravok had been watching Earth as well. They believed humans were too new in galactic affairs to stand as equals. This was why a bond between Earth and Zorath Prime could send a strong message. The king spoke plainly. He said that a human hero standing beside the royal family would show unity between worlds at first. Tom did not understand why this matter was being told to him. He was only a guest. But then the king looked at him with steady eyes and said something that made Tom pause. The king suggested that if Tom agreed to join his family, the Dravok would see this as a powerful alliance. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. The king was hinting at marriage between Tom and Princess Lyra. Tom was taken by surprise. He respected Lyra and enjoyed her company, but marriage was not something he had expected when he came to Zorath Prime. He asked why the king would trust him with such a role. The king replied that courage and honor mattered more than titles or birth. Tom had already shown those qualities when he saved lives in space. The king believed that a person with true character could strengthen bonds between entire civilizations, e.e. Discussion paused when a guard entered the chamber. He carried troubling news. A small Dravok vessel had been sighted near the outer edge of Zorath territory. It had not answered calls from the patrol ships. The council grew tense. The king ordered additional scouts to watch the border, but told everyone to remain calm. The Dravok often tested their neighbors before making any real move later that day. Tom met with Lyra in the palace library. She was seated near a tall window, reading from a crystal tablet. She looked up when Tom entered and smiled faintly. He sat across from her and tried to find the right words. Finally, he told her what the king had said about marriage and alliance. Lyra did not seem shocked. She said she had guessed this might happen when the king invited him to stay. Lyra explained that alliances through marriage were an old tradition in Zorath history. They were not simply political tools, but also symbols of trust and friendship. She admitted that the thought of marrying someone from another world was unusual, but she also said she respected Tom and valued the honesty she had seen in him. Her voice was calm, but Tom could see that she understood the weight of the choice. As much as he did, their talk was interrupted when one of the guards came to fetch Tom. The king wanted to see him again. This time the meeting was in the strategy hall. A large map of the Zorath system floated in the air as a hologram. Red points marked the latest Dravok sightings. The king explained that the Dravok Empire often used spies to gather information before any open move. The king believed some spies might already be on Zorath Prime. That evening, as the palace lights glowed softly under the twin moons, Tom walked along the balcony of his chambers. His mind was busy with thoughts. The king trusted him, the princess respected him, and the kingdom faced real danger. If the Dravok attacked, it could mean great loss for the people he had come to admire. He thought of Earth and how humans always stood by their friends in times of need. The idea of turning away from Zorath Prime now felt wrong. The next day brought alarming news. A small group of strangers had been caught near one of the floating city's power cores. They carried devices not made by Zorath engineers. The Royal Guard believed these strangers were Dravok agents sent to damage the city's defenses. The king called a meeting with his council and showed Tom the evidence. The Dravok were clearly testing the kingdom's strength. Tom began to see the bigger picture. The Dravok respected power and unity. If Zorath Prime appeared weak or alone, the enemy would strike. But if the kingdom showed strong bonds with other worlds, the Dravok might hesitate. A public bond with Earth could be a powerful shield. Tom still had doubts, but he also felt a growing sense of duty. He had been given rare trust by the king and his people. Turning away now would mean leaving them vulnerable. That night, the palace was quiet, except for the sound of the night wind. Tom stood again on his balcony, looking at the stars. Somewhere beyond those stars, the Dravok were watching and waiting. He thought about Lyra, her calm voice and her steady gaze. He thought about the king, willing to place the safety of his people in the hands of an outsider. Tom realized that his visit to Zorath Prime was no longer just a personal adventure. It was part of a larger struggle for peace and survival. He still had no answer to the king's proposal, but he knew the time for deciding was coming soon. The next morning, the palace was filled with a sense of quiet tension. The king had ordered the guards to double their watch. Patrol ships circled the skies above the floating city. The Dravok threat had become more real after the capture of the spies. Yet daily life in the palace continued as the king wanted his people to feel safe. Tom noticed that even with the extra security, the royal family carried themselves with calm dignity. Tom spent the morning in the palace courtyard, where Princess Lyra was training with her personal guard. She wore light armor that shimmered in the sun and moved with quick precision as she practiced with a short staff. Tom watched with respect as she blocked and countered each strike from her sparring partner. When the training ended, Lyra approached. Him smiling slightly as she wiped her brow, she invited Tom to join her on a short journey to a nearby crystal garden outside the city. The garden floated on its own platform and was connected by a long walkway. Guards followed at a distance, giving them some space to speak freely. The crystal garden was a peaceful place where tall crystal formations grew like frozen trees. They caught the sunlight and scattered it into soft rainbows across the ground as they walked among the crystals. Lyra spoke of her father's worries. She said the king had always been careful with diplomacy, but that the Dravok were more aggressive than any rival they had faced in years. She told Tom that her people valued alliances built on trust, not fear, and that was why the king wanted someone like him beside the family. Tom listened, knowing her words carried more than simple conversation. He could hear the weight of responsibility in her voice. They stopped near a pool of clear water where small silver fish swam lazily. Lyra knelt and touched the water's surface, sending ripples outward. She asked Tom what he truly thought of Zorath Prime. Tom answered honestly, saying it was one of the most beautiful places he had ever seen, and that he respected the kindness of its people. He also admitted that he felt unsure about becoming part of the royal family. Lyra nodded slowly, saying she understood. She told him that important choices often came with uncertainty, but that sometimes the heart knew the answer before the mind. On their way back to the city, Tom noticed the guards looking uneasy. A faint hum filled the air. Suddenly, a dark shape passed overhead. It was a small black craft moving low and fast. The guards shouted warnings and signaled for cover. The craft released a strange device that struck the walkway ahead. A burst of light and smoke erupted, shaking the platform. Tom and Lyra were pushed back by the force. The guards quickly surrounded them, weapons ready. Tom could see the black craft turning away and disappearing into the clouds. The walkway had been damaged, but was still stable. One guard reported that the device was not an explosive, but some kind of scanner or signal transmitter. This meant the Dravok were gathering information even inside Zorath territory. Lyra remained calm, but her eyes showed a flicker of anger. She told the guards to report to her father at once. When they reached the palace, the king was already waiting. He listened to the report with a hard expression. He turned to Tom and said this was proof that the Dravok would not stop testing the kingdom's defenses. The king's advisors urged immediate action to strengthen their alliances. The king looked at Tom and reminded him that the choice they had spoken about was not only about him and Lyra, but about the safety of millions. That evening, Tom sat alone in his chambers, thinking about the attack. He remembered the moment the device exploded and how Lyra had been close enough to be hurt. The thought made his chest tighten. He realized he cared deeply about her safety. It was not only respect or friendship anymore. He admired her courage, her wisdom, and her dedication to her people. He also thought of the king, who carried the burden of protecting his world. Tom began to understand that his decision would not be about politics alone. It was about standing by those he had come to care for. Later, Lyra came to see him. She wore a simple gown instead of her royal attire. She sat beside him on the balcony where the twin moons lit the rivers below. She thanked him for staying calm during the attack and for trusting her guards. Tom told her he was glad she was unharmed. For a long moment they sat quietly, listening to the soft wind. Then Lyra spoke, saying she knew the choice before him was not easy. She said she would not force him into anything, but she wanted him to know she believed they could protect their people better together than apart. Tom felt a warmth in her words. He thought of Earth and the values he had been raised with, helping friends, keeping promises, standing against threats. These values matched what Lyra and her people believed. He realized that his presence here was no accident. The king had seen something in him that could make a difference. The next day, the palace prepared for a public ceremony in the main square. The king would address the people about the recent threat. Thousands gathered below the high balcony where the royal family stood. The king spoke of unity and courage. He promised that Zorath Prime would not stand alone. The crowd cheered, their voices echoing across the city. Tom stood beside Lyra during the speech. As he looked over the crowd, He felt the weight of the moment. These were the people whose future might depend on the choice he would make. He still had not given the king his answer, but deep inside, a decision was forming. That night, Tom looked out at the glowing rivers one more time before sleeping. He knew that soon he would have to give the king his answer, and this time it would come from both his heart and his sense of duty. The morning sun rose over Zorath Prime, casting a golden light across the floating city. The palace was already awake. Servants moved quickly, preparing for the day's duties. Guards stood at every entrance, alert and watchful. The Dravok threat still hung over the kingdom like a shadow. Inside his chambers, Tom sat at a small table, looking at the crystal flower the market craftsman had given him. He turned it slowly in his hand. Thinking about everything that had happened since he arrived, he remembered his quiet life on the space station, where his biggest worry had been repairing engines. Now he was caught in a struggle between worlds. He had seen the loyalty of the Zorath people, the strength of their king, and the courage of Lyra. He knew the decision before him was no longer only about himself. It was about standing for something greater. Tom was summoned to the king's private study. The room was lined with shelves of books and old maps. Sunlight streamed in through tall windows. The king was seated at a polished desk, his expression calm but expectant. He gestured for Tom to sit. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the king asked quietly if Tom had reached his decision. Tom met the king's gaze. He said he had thought carefully about what was being asked of him. He spoke of the kindness he had received, the trust the king had shown, and the friendship he had found with Lyra. He said he could not walk away while Zorath Prime faced such danger. Finally, Tom gave his answer. He would join the royal family, stand beside Lyra and form the alliance that would link their worlds. The king's stern face softened into a proud smile. He rose from his seat and placed a firm hand on Tom's shoulder. He thanked him, saying his choice would be remembered for generations. The king promised that together they would show the Dravok Empire that Zorath Prime and Earth stood as one. That afternoon, the royal herald spread the news across the city. Bells rang from the tall spires. Banners of blue and gold were hung along the streets. People gathered in the main square, curious and excited. The king appeared on the high balcony with Tom and Lyra at his side. He announced that Tom, a hero from Earth, had agreed to unite his life with the royal family. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices carrying through the city. Lyra stepped forward and took Tom's hand. She spoke to the people, saying that this bond was not only a union of two lives, but a promise of friendship between worlds. Her voice was clear and strong, and the crowd responded with even greater applause. Tom felt a deep sense of belonging, as he stood there not as a visitor, but as someone who had chosen to defend this world. That evening, preparations began for a formal engagement ceremony. The palace was filled with activity. Tailors worked on ceremonial robes. Cooks prepared special dishes for the banquet. Messengers were sent to invite leaders from other allied worlds. The event would be a message to all who watched that Zorath Prime was not alone. While the preparations continued, the royal commander met with Tom in the training hall. The commander was a tall, seasoned warrior with silver streaks in his hair. He told Tom that as a future member of the royal family, he must be ready for any challenge. He handed Tom a short ceremonial blade, saying it was both a symbol of honor and a tool for defense. Tom accepted it with respect. They spent the afternoon training. Tom was no expert with weapons, but he learned quickly under the commander's guidance. The next day, Lyra invited Tom to walk with her in the palace gardens. She wore a gown of deep blue that shimmered softly in the light. She told him she was proud of his choice and believed they would face the future together with strength. Tom told her he had made his decision because he believed in her and her people. They walked among the silver-leafed trees, talking about the ceremony and the days ahead. As the engagement day approached, guests from distant systems began arriving. The palace docks were filled with sleek starships of many designs. Leaders in fine robes stepped onto the platform, greeted by the king and his advisors. Inside the palace, musicians rehearsed, their strange instruments filling the halls with soft melodies. The air buzzed with anticipation, but while the celebrations grew, the Dravok did not remain silent. Reports reached the palace of increased movement along the border. Patrols spotted more Dravok scouts near the outer colonies. The royal council discussed the possibility that the enemy might try to disrupt the engagement ceremony. The king ordered extra security and placed the entire palace on high alert. Tom listened to the discussion and understood that his choice carried real consequences. If the Dravok saw this alliance as a threat, they might strike sooner rather than later. The night before the ceremony, Tom stood again on his balcony. The glowing rivers below shimmered under the twin moons. He could hear faint music from the lower halls where the final rehearsals continued. Lyra joined him, her hair loose and shining in the moonlight. She asked if he was ready for tomorrow. Tom said he was, though he knew it would change his life forever. Lyra smiled and said change was often the first step toward something better. They stood together in the quiet night, knowing that the next day would mark the beginning of a new chapter. Tom felt no fear now. He had made his choice, and it was the right one. Whatever came, he would face it beside Lyra and the people of Zorath Prime. The morning of the engagement ceremony arrived, but before any celebration could begin, the king called Tom to the council chamber. The mood was serious. The king explained that according to Zorath tradition, anyone who wished to marry into the royal family must complete the royal trial. It was a test of courage, wisdom, and honor. Only by passing it could Tom prove he was worthy to stand beside Princess Lyra as her equal. Tom felt the weight of the challenge. He had already made his choice to join the royal family, but now he would have to show the entire kingdom that his decision was backed by action. The king assured him that the trial was not meant to humiliate or harm, but to test the heart and spirit of the candidate. Lyra stood nearby, her gaze calm but filled with quiet encouragement. She told Tom she believed in him. The first part of the trial began in the Hall of Paths, a great chamber with 3 doors, each leading to a different challenge. Tom was told he could choose the order, but all must be completed before sunset. He decided to begin with the test of courage. This challenge took place in the Maze of Shadows, a twisting network of corridors built into the cliffs beneath the palace. The only light came from glowing stones placed far apart. Strange echoes filled the halls, and at times the path seemed to shift underfoot. Tom moved carefully, remembering advice from the royal commander to trust his instincts. Several times he reached dead ends, but he kept going, determined not to turn back. At one point, he heard a low growl from the darkness ahead. A large beast stepped into view, its eyes reflecting the faint light. It was part of the trial, meant to test his nerve. Tom did not panic. He slowly raised his ceremonial blade and held his ground. The beast studied him for a moment before stepping aside, allowing him to pass. When Tom emerged from the maze, the guards saluted him for completing the first test. The second challenge was the test of wisdom, held in the Chamber of Riddles. Inside, 3 elders waited, each holding a scroll. They asked questions about Zorath, history, the laws of the kingdom, and the meaning of honor. Tom listened carefully to each question. Some answers he knew from his conversations with Lyra and the king. Others he had to reason out from what he had learned since arriving on the planet. One riddle spoke of a river that flowed without water, and Tom realized it referred to the glowing rivers of energy that powered the floating cities. His answers satisfied the elders, who nodded with approval. The final challenge was the test of honor. For this, Tom was taken to a council hall, where a dispute was staged between 2 rival village leaders. It was his task to listen to their claims and make a fair judgment. The argument was over land that both villages used for farming. Tom listened to each side, asked questions, and thought about a solution that would benefit both without harm. In the end, he proposed that the land be shared equally, with each village responsible for maintaining a part of it. The staged dispute ended with both leaders agreeing, and the council praised Tom's fairness. By the time the trials were complete, the sun was beginning to set. Tom returned to the main square where the people had gathered for the engagement ceremony. The king stepped forward and announced that Tom had faced the royal trial and passed each challenge with courage, wisdom, and honor. The crowd erupted in cheers. Lyra smiled proudly, and Tom felt a wave of relief and pride. He had not only won the king's approval, but also the respect of the people. But the moment of celebration was interrupted by urgent news. A messenger rushed to the king and whispered in his ear. The king's expression darkened. He turned to the crowd and said that Dravok ships had been sighted near the outer defense line. They were not attacking yet, but their presence so close to Zorath's space was a clear sign of threat. The people grew quiet, their joy tempered by the reminder of danger. The king ordered his commanders to prepare defensive positions. Lyra looked at Tom, her eyes steady. She told him that the Dravok would see his trials as proof of strength, but they might still try to test the kingdom. Tom answered that if they did, he would be ready to stand with her and with Zorath Prime. The ceremony went on despite the warning. The king placed a silver and gold sash over Tom's shoulders, marking him as the future son-in-law of the royal house. Lyra stepped forward, taking his hand, and the crowd's cheers returned, stronger this time. The people needed hope as much as strength, and the sight of their princess standing beside a human ally gave them both. Later that night, the palace held a banquet in the grand hall. Music filled the air, and the scent of rich dishes drifted from the long tables. Tom sat beside Lyra, speaking with visiting leaders from allied worlds. Many congratulated him on his trials and said they believed the alliance would help keep the Dravok in check. Yet the thought of the enemy ships still lingered in Tom's mind. He knew they were watching, waiting for the right moment. After the banquet, Tom walked through the quiet palace gardens. The moonlight reflected off the silver leaves, and the gentle sound of running water filled the air. Lyra joined him, and they walked side by side without speaking for a while. Finally, Tom told her that passing the trials had shown him how much he had changed since coming to Zorath Prime. He was no longer just a guest from Earth. He was part of something bigger, and he was ready to protect it. Lyra nodded and said she believed that together they could face whatever the Dravok planned. She reminded him that the trials were not only a tradition, but a promise that he would stand for the people and for her. Tom met her gaze and gave his word that he would keep that promise. The night was calm, but both knew the peace might not last. The Dravok were close, and their next move could come at any time. Yet Tom felt no fear. He had passed the trials, earned the trust of the king, and found his place beside Lyra. Whatever came next, he would be ready. The day of the wedding arrived with clear skies and soft sunlight. The floating city was decorated with banners of blue and gold that fluttered gently in the warm breeze. Streets were filled with people dressed in their finest robes, smiling and greeting one another. The anticipation was everywhere. This was more than a wedding. It was a symbol of hope for all of Zorath Prime, and Earth Tom woke early in his chambers. He dressed carefully in the ceremonial robes given to him. The fabric was light, but strong, embroidered with patterns of stars and rivers that represented both Earth and Zorath. When he looked in the mirror, he hardly recognized the man staring back. He was no longer the simple engineer from the space station. He was a symbol of unity. Between two worlds, Lyra's chambers were filled with soft light. She wore a gown of deep blue that sparkled like the night sky. Her hair was braided with silver threads, and a small crown rested gently on her head. She looked calm and radiant, As she prepared to leave, her handmaidens gathered around, offering quiet encouragement. Lyra took a deep breath and smiled. Today was the start of a new journey. The ceremony took place on a grand platform overlooking the glowing rivers below. The king stood at the center, with advisors and guests from many worlds seated around. The sky above was clear, and the twin moons shone brightly. A gentle breeze carried the scent of flowering trees through the air. Tom stood beside Lyra, feeling the weight of the moment, but also a deep calm inside. The king spoke words of unity and peace. He said that this marriage was not only a bond between two people, but a promise to protect each other's worlds. He called upon all present to stand as witnesses to this promise. Tom looked at Lyra and took her hand. She smiled warmly, and together they exchanged vows of loyalty, friendship, and love. As the ceremony ended, the crowd cheered with joy. Music filled the air, played on instruments both strange and beautiful. The celebration moved to the palace gardens where tables were set with foods from Earth and Zorath. People danced beneath the stars, their laughter echoing across the city. Tom felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. He was part of a family, a kingdom, and a future that held hope. But even in the midst of celebration, the threat of the Dravok remained. The king and his advisors kept watch over the borders. Scouts reported that Dravok ships had withdrawn for now, but their silence was uneasy. Everyone knew this peace was fragile. The alliance between Earth and Zorath Prime was a powerful message, but it would take strength and courage to keep it. In the days after the wedding, Tom and Lyra worked together to strengthen their people's bonds. They visited villages, met with leaders, and shared stories of their worlds. Tom used his skills to help improve the city's defenses, working with engineers to build new systems that combined human and Zorath technology. Lyra led diplomatic talks with nearby allies, building trust and friendship that reached beyond their own planet one evening. As they stood together on a balcony overlooking the glowing rivers, Tom asked Lyra if she believed the peace would last. She looked up at the stars and said that peace was not something given, but something earned every day. She said that with unity and courage, they could face whatever challenges the future held. Tom smiled and said he was ready to face those challenges with her by his side. The twin moons shone above them like silent guardians, lighting the path. Toward a new dawn, Zorath Prime and Earth were no longer separate worlds. They were united by trust, friendship, and a promise made under the twin moons. And in that promise lay the hope for a future where many worlds could stand together, strong and free.